Oh, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our final volunteer tutor and classroom aide webinar. Today, Sarah Cole is going to be talking about pronunciation best practices. Um, Sarah is with the Professional Learning Opportunities Project and has a lot of experience with teaching English language learners. Um, I'd like to remind you that we will still I'm still going to ask you if you would like to complete the survey I just linked in the chat after the webinar. Even though this is our final webinar, we still are looking at people's responses since we do plan to offer more support for volunteers in the future. Um, and if you would like to watch the recording for this or any of the volunteer tutor and classroom aide webinars, you can access them on the PA Adult Ed Resources tutoring page that I just put in the chat. Usually the recordings go up about a week after the webinar. And with that, Sarah, I'm going to let you take it away.
All right. Thanks very much, Rachel, and welcome everybody. I just want to start off right off the bat saying thanks so much for all that you do for all the adult learners that you work with. Uh, Honestly, adult ed really couldn't do what we do if we didn't have so many wonderful, dedicated volunteers. So I'm so happy you're here. Um, One other caveat I'll make right before we get going is I'm a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel, and there's actually quite a bit of pretty good, high quality resources already out there around pronunciation. So, a lot of what I'm going to be focusing on today is looking at what's already out there, primarily through Literacy Minnesota. So, they both have a lot of recorded webinars that we're going to give you a sheet closer towards the end of the webinar with a whole bunch of resources of videos, as well as they have a toolkit that's linked through their website as well. So really what I'm going to be doing a lot is sort of doing a summary and focusing on like, well, why should you be doing pronunciation teaching and how might you prioritize what you want to do around pronunciation and then showing you some resources rather than getting super deep and nitty gritty, which honestly we couldn't anyway because there's so much about pronunciation and we only have 1 hour. So I also will say feel free to raise your hand or drop a question in the chat. I'm happy to keep this kind of conversational and we can kind of talk about things as we go. So with all of that said, I'll move to my first slide. So our agenda, we're going to do a little bit of introductions. I'd really love to learn a little bit about your own particular contexts. I'm guessing that most of the folks here are working with English language learners, hence the interest in that. But I'd like to know a little bit more about the students and who you're working with. We'll talk about our objectives. So what I hope that you're going to be able to take away from this and know about pronunciation. We'll talk about best practices then. So we'll look more specifically like, okay, what can you do to achieve those objectives that we just talked about? And then finally, I am going to talk a little bit about activities and resources, and we'll share. It'll be a Google Doc that has a number of different links that you can kind of go and explore and go deeper with some of the things that we talk about today. So, any questions about what we're about to do before we start talking introductions? All right. So, um, I guess we'll do our objectives and then the introductions is on the next slide. I flip-flop them. Forgive me. So our objectives, what we'll look at, we'll describe some of those best practices in teaching pronunciation. We'll examine some strategies that support that pronunciation practice, and then we'll look at further resources. So for our introductions, I'm going to actually, before we have just enough people that I think we're going to use the chat because otherwise I think it might be a little bit cacophonous, but I'll read out and Rachel and Lynn will support me in this. If you want to type into the chat first, who are the learners that you work with? So feel free, type in the chat. It could be the language background the learners you're working with come from, or it could be about the leveling. I always find it a little tricky to talk about the leveling because one person's beginner is different than another person's beginner, but giving a rough sense, newer to the language, experienced with the language. Yep, and I will start looking at those. So it looks like Stacy's working with very much a beginner. Betsy works with beginner, a Latino class, it's Casa San Jose, and then two groups of Afghani students working on citizenship. Janet's working with students from Belarus and South Korea, so they have a Russian and Korean language background, intermediate to advanced. Janie is waiting to be assigned a learner, but presumably is going to be working with an English language learner, I would assume. Cheryl is working with a student from China who's been here for many years and has been working. Roberta's working with intermediate and advanced English language learners and citizenship. And I also trains volunteer tutors. Thanks, Roberta, for your hard work around that. Susan's working with Spanish speakers, all starting at a more beginner level. Rayanne is working with advanced English Spanish speaker. Anne is working with an older student from a 63-year-old student from Cuba. Kate is working with a student from Venezuela. Alan's just started working with a new student and should complete, I see, just started doing tutor training, it sounds like, and we'll hold a seminar. Okay. No, I don't think you have to hold off on this seminar until you complete your training. I think that this could just be something you have in your pocket for once you get going. I see what you're saying now, Ellen. So yeah, if you're working with an English language learner, everybody, spoiler alert, everybody could use pronunciation work, or you could teach that to them. So this will just be something you have. You might not be able to use it till later, but I don't think you need any prior training for this. Christine is working with two students, one from Puerto Rico and one who has a Japanese language background. We have someone working with intermediate learners. Lynn's working with folks from a number of different language backgrounds, we'll just say at all levels. Intermediate learner who needs help with pronunciation. Okay, you're in the right place. We have someone who's working with volunteer tutors, and the students are from levels all over the place. So I'm really seeing a plurality of backgrounds. That is great. And I'm excited to kind of talk a little bit more about that. So Japanese student with an interesting conversation, someone from Moldova. Christine's done some pronunciation and reading activities with her students. And we have a tutoring specialist working with learners of all levels. Great. So everybody, thank you so much for sharing a little bit about who you work with. The next thing we're going to do, and we're going to go back to the chat, but I'm going to ask for you to type and hold off on sending what you're going to send right away. So has anyone ever done a waterfall activity before? You can unmute and say yes or no, or you can write it in the chat, whatever works better for communicating.
No.
No. Okay. I hear no and I see no. Okay. I see some yeses, but a lot of no's. So I'm going to explain what a waterfall activity is. If you work with learners online, more than one learner, this could be a cool way to do participation with students. So this will be a little activity. It's a low lift activity that you'll have in your back pocket going forward. But a waterfall activity is when you pose a question, you ask the learners to type it in the chat, but rather than have them hit send or put it through right away, everybody holds off until the teacher says like go or waterfall, and then everyone hits send at the same time and you see a waterfall of responses. So it can be really nice to use the chat in this way because people won't necessarily see like each other's responses. Like I definitely have sometimes in my class when I've worked with learners, like people will look at what other people are saying or writing and then like put that in. This way, it's like everybody's sharing their own response without seeing what other people say yet. And it's also kind of cool to see all the responses come in at the same time. So we're going to do that. And by doing that, I'm going to ask you to write what you're going to say, but I don't want you to hit send yet. Okay. Yep, that's okay, Betsy. So what you'll do, so I'm going to ask, do you currently teach pronunciation with the learners that you work with? Type a response to that, but don't send it yet, please. Don't send it yet. And then if you do pronunciation already with your learners, how do you practice? Okay, so we're typing those, but we're not sending it yet. Don't click the little, I think it's like an airplane. It looks like a little paper airplane. Don't send the paper airplane yet. Okay. So I'll give you about 1 minute and then we'll send it in there. Okay. So just type your response to number 2. Don't send it yet. Okay. I'm scrolling through faces. It looks like a lot of folks are finished. So if you want to go ahead now, hit send. So waterfall, hit send. Thank you. Beautiful. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to look through and share this with the group. So I see some, no, teach vocabulary words or spelling for pronunciation. Don't do pronunciation per se, just correct when someone doesn't pronounce correctly. A little bit. Both of us go back and forth saying a word, showing where my tongue hits or doesn't hit my teeth. Okay, that's great. We're going to talk a little bit more. That's something called voice quality settings. When you're talking about where the teeth and the tongue hit. Yeah, I do teach pronunciation. We practice mostly by imitation and mimicking. Also, me trying to explain mouth movements. So those mouth movements, the voice quality settings, we'll talk more about that today. Drill down on a word I can't understand. Get to where I can understand it and then have them repeat after me all the time using IPA and assign homework recording to practice pronunciation by sight, practice with poetry, authentic vocabulary. Yes, online programs and games and vocabulary work. Don't teach students directly, but we have pronunciation materials available. State the correct pronunciation, ask the student to repeat, may repeat several times. Use pronunciation worksheets and reading aloud. Yes, pronunciation book. Not yet. Encouraging conversation, role plays, pronunciation videos. Yes, working on stress in caps with hand movements, sorting by stress syllables. Okay, great. And minimal pairs. Great. So some of the things I saw in there, some of you will say, I am familiar with those. Not a problem. Great. This is just an affirmation of what you're already doing then. There's definitely some things, though, that I didn't see mentioned that we will talk about today. So hopefully there'll be a little bit of something new for everyone. And we're also going to talk about in just a moment why teach pronunciation and how to go about it as well. So like how to think about like how frequently as well. So thanks so much for sharing. That gives me a good sense of where everybody is in the room. So why teach it? I think that this is a great place to start. Like if you're going to teach something or you're going to work on something with the learners you're working with, good idea to know why. Why should you be doing this? So teaching it explicitly rather than just repeating back and forth helps support learners in being more comprehensible. And if there's nothing else you take from this today, I really want to focus on thinking about pronunciation as being more comprehensible rather than trying to get rid of anyone's accent. If you take away nothing else, we're not trying to get rid of students' accents. That's not the point. People can be perfectly comprehensible by having their accents. For some people, it's really important actually for their personal identity to keep an accent. So we're really going to focus more on comprehensibility. And the best practices we'll look at are the ones that are going to give you the most bang for your buck, so to speak, around making sure students are comprehensible. The other reason to teach pronunciation explicitly is it isn't obvious. So even if like a learner mispronounced something and you pronounce it back to them, they may not actually be able to hear the difference. So you have to highlight the difference of what's going on there. And learners won't necessarily just pick up by listening or repeating or hearing things. So you have to draw out some of the, like, how do you make this sound? What is comprising this sound? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then another reason to teach pronunciation explicitly is learners carry over their pronunciation patterns from their home language unless the differences in English are highlighted to them. So with voice quality settings in particular, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is in a moment, learners bring over whatever their voice quality settings are from their home language rather than what it would be in English. And unless that's kind of drawn out or shown to them what those differences are, it's really hard for them to understand how they're going to have to shift holding their mouth and their teeth and their tongue unless it's highlighted the difference between their home language and English. So any questions about that before we continue on? Okay. So what are some best practices around pronunciation? So how might you approach it and to what extent? So another thing that I would love for you to carry away from this, in addition to like pronunciation is about comprehensibility and not getting rid of anyone's accent, is that you really want to teach pronunciation in a contextualized and meaningful way. So I wouldn't suggest kind of sitting there and making a bunch of sounds for a really long period of time in class because it's not contextualized. What you want to do is embed your pronunciation practices into the normal routines you're already doing with your learners. So, for example, if maybe you work through doing an article or a story and you pre-teach vocabulary, while you're doing that pre-teaching of vocabulary, you start to highlight some of the different pronunciation aspects of the vocabulary, which some of you shared, it sounds like you're already doing. Then you want to make sure you quickly move from doing that pronunciation work with the vocabulary to seeing the vocabulary in a meaningful context and some sort of text that the learners are working with that's relevant to them. And then having them try to use the vocabulary and practice the pronunciation in a meaningful context related to what you just read. So teaching in a contextualized, meaningful way, some of the ways you can do that is explicitly pointing out the patterns and drawing learners' awareness to common sound combinations that they might hear. Using interactive and multimodal approaches to doing pronunciation. So having them move around, maybe having them clap or stomp or kind of tap out either on their fingers or on the desk or on the table in front of them, some of those different sounds. And then doing it in different ways. Also looking at the patterns, like sorting words by either similar, we'll talk about stress patterns, sorting words by similar stress patterns, or doing practice where we'll talk about something called lip reading you can do for pronunciation practice. So making sure you're doing things that are interactive and multimodal, and then also trying to do a little bit of practice frequently and routinely as part of a larger set of routines. So pronunciation work can be kind of exhausting for learners, but it is important work to do. So the way you're going to get a lot is by doing frequent small amounts of pronunciation practice. So having that kind of as part of your normal routine, having it as a set thing that you're doing on a regular basis, but not belaboring it because it can be exhausting. Like you wouldn't want to sit for an hour and do pronunciation practice. You might do it for 5, 10, 15 minutes as part of a much larger or longer lesson. And that way you can also do it in a contextualized, meaningful way. Like you're not spending the whole activity just doing pronunciation or your whole period together just doing pronunciation. You're doing a little bit of it and then you're putting it back in a meaningful context. And then you can revisit it as you continue to meet with the learner. So any questions about that? So these are just kind of the strategies you can use around teaching pronunciation. Okay. So what do you want to focus on with pronunciation instruction? We talked about like how you might approach it. What's the content of the pronunciation that you want to look at? So again, I want to draw your attention to the idea of focusing on comprehensibility. So making sure the learners are understood rather than just getting rid of an accent. And then some of the pronunciation features that really help the most or that are shown to help the most in being well understood are word stress, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, and voice quality settings. So doing sounds and phonemes and things like that are great for doing reading practice, but actually for pronunciation, these two things are going to get you further faster than just talking about the sounds. So thinking about the word stress as well as the voice quality settings, which again, we'll talk about both of these in more detail in just a minute. But any questions about this? Okay. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about word stress. So we'll talk about word stress first, and then we're going to talk a little bit about voice quality settings. So with word stress, there are a number of different ways you can teach this. So word stress, before kind of talking about this, word stress is talking about the different parts of a word and how like loud or quiet they are. So in different words, we have different stress. So I'll use the word banana as an example. So I usually start with my learners by drawing their attention to the idea that words have syllables. They have a number of beats, and we can start to practice that through counting the syllables, whether it's clapping, tapping, or stomping. So we would say banana, banana. Okay, so I hear how many syllables. So I would talk with the learners or learner. How many syllables do you hear in banana? 3. There's 3 syllables in banana. So that's kind of the base from which you start to talk about stress, is how many beats or parts of the word are there. So in banana, banana 3. So you may, if this is brand new to your learners, you may start with just practicing talking about syllables before you would move to any of these other things, because that's going to kind of form the basis of doing any other additional pronunciation work. Okay, so once you have that down, any questions about that? Any questions about syllables? I heard a couple people talk in the chat before that they do this before. Does anyone want to unmute and share a little bit about how you do syllables?
I'm just curious,
Yeah.
other than beat, how do you
Mhm.
define syllable?
I know it is a tricky one because it's not like something you can easily explain, especially with learners who might have a more limited vocabulary.
Right.
So I actually try to be very physical, or the other way I've done it with learners is like really highlighting the piece of the word and then it goes together. But I actually find that usually the like clapping and the hearing of that's usually what I find people latch on to the best, is like banana. Okay, there's 3 parts of that. You could also like cut a word up, like you could print out a word in large block font and like kind of parse it out like that. But I feel like in my experience working with learners, the like just physically kind of marking it out is what people tend to like. They're like, oh yeah, I hear that. That makes sense to me the most.
Okay, so you don't get into like each vowel sound, or
You could, but I often just starting there is like
cut
there's
it
not
out.
so many moving parts. Like so it's like, okay, this is just like banana. We hear 3 parts
They
of the
hear it.
word.
Okay.
And then starting to talk about some of the like, okay, where do you hear the ba? Is it in the first part, the first clap, the second clap, or the third clap? Where do you hear that sound? And we'll talk more about that in a bit. But like starting kind of with if they got syllables, we can build a lot up on top of that. But if they haven't done any of this work before, starting there. What about anybody else? Any other experience, either talking about syllables that you want to share or questions you might have? Is this
So,
go ahead. Yep.
so after I figured out I wasn't maybe doing it right, then I got the book Clear Speech from
Mm-hmm.
Literacy Pittsburgh, and it
Mm-hmm.
totally, I mean, it has revolutionized my understanding of what you're saying is exactly true, and it has a teacher's book that teaches you how to do it. So I found that to be just hugely helpful with this part of the syllables thing.
Yeah. What's the name of that book again? Clear
It's
Clear
called
Speech.
Speech,
Okay.
and it's by a woman. I can't see the author right now, but it's excellent for teaching pronunciation, and it starts exactly with the syllables, just like you do.
Okay. Great. I'm always looking for additional resources and tools. So thanks for sharing, Susan. Ray Ann says, sometimes I sing song it. Thanks, Rachel, for putting that in the chat too. Can you tell a little bit? Would you be comfortable coming off mute and telling a little bit more about that, Ray Ann?
Yeah, just when there's especially a difficulty, like a longer amount of
Mm-hmm.
syllables word. Say banana, I would do like banana and make them sing song it back. It's kind of giving a beat, but it's breaking it down as well. It doesn't correctly often put where the stress syllable is, but it gets them the pieces of the word sometimes. And sometimes I know if you sing song something to me, it clicks. So I
Okay.
try to use it with other people.
Nice. Thanks. Okay. Well, if there isn't anything else anyone wants to share, we then usually move from counting syllables. You start to look at identifying, okay, which of those syllables is stressed. And I really want to emphasize this is a big game changer. Like if someone's putting the stress on the wrong part of the word, that's actually typically harder for someone to understand for their comprehensibility than actually even messing up some of the phonemes. So like, for example, like one of the things people talk about a lot, the TH sound is very hard for a lot of people to produce. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about the voice quality settings, because it's related to that usually. A lot of other languages don't have the kind of thing where your tongue is coming between your teeth to make a sound. In a lot of other languages, they don't have that voice quality setting. So it's a new way of moving your mouth that learners might not be familiar with. But with context, even if someone can't pronounce that, people can usually figure out what they're saying. So for example, if I was like, this sweater is very thick, but I said, this sweater is very tick. It's very tick. If you were talking about clothes, you could reasonably kind of figure out with some context what the learner was probably trying to say. However, if someone's word stress is way off, it can make it such that that person is really not comprehensible. Like you can't understand what they're saying. So for example, I'm going to use a different one because thick's only one syllable. So that doesn't really work too well for trying to talk about the stress being wrong. If I was going to talk about, let me see here. I had an example and then I neglected to put it in my notes. So this is why I'm like, oh, what is it now? If I was trying to look for something in a store and I was like, oh, where are the markers? The markers. Like if I was hearing someone saying markers, that sounds way weirder than someone messing up the phoneme at the beginning of a word. It's harder to understand. And I know that in some of the resources that I'm going to share with you, some of those different videos, they talk about in the Literacy Minnesota, some different studies that they did and how basically learners putting the stress on the wrong syllable resulted in like really crazy mishearings of words that like the word was not even close to what the person thought that it was. Yeah. Rachel put an other in bathtub in the, so yeah, if you said a thur, that's really confusing rather than someone just saying other. So again, if you take nothing else from this, stress actually makes a really big difference in comprehensibility. So moving from counting the syllables, you could then work to identifying the stress syllables. And there's a couple different ways you could do this. So you can do it, we'll use banana again. You could put the stress on the louder clap. So we clapped 3 times before to say that's how many syllables in banana. So stress of banana, is it banana? No. Okay. Banana. Banana. Yeah, the stress is in the middle syllable. So we clap louder on the middle of the 3 syllables. Okay. So that's one way you could do it. You can hum. Hmm, hmm, hmm. Hmm, hmm, hmm. So banana. You can also, I've seen this done a lot. So if you wanted to do it visually, bubbles or circles, and you'll see some examples of this in the resources I'm going to share with you. So it would be like small circle, small circle for banana. Small circle, big circle, small circle. Okay. And I see a couple things in the chat. I'm going to take a look at that. Okay. Rachel, thank you. Okay. So any questions about identifying stress syllables? In the resources that I'm going to share, there's some different examples of this in the videos that I'm going to share, as well as in, there's a toolkit. Okay. So then you would move from counting syllables to identifying stress syllables, and then you can start to do some producing or controlled practice. So learners saying the word while really emphasizing the stress in the word. So repeating a number of times. That's when you'd start to get to this point. So banana, banana. People could clap along with it. They could practice diagramming it while they're saying it with the bubbles or the circles that we talked about. So practice producing those different words using the syllables, using the stress syllable. And then once there's some practice with those, you can move into grouping words into stress patterns. So I've done this in a couple different ways. You could have a worksheet. So once you've kind of practiced the syllables, saying how many syllables the words have, practice and learners have an awareness of like diagramming or identifying where the stress syllable is, and then practice producing it. They can group words into stress patterns. So it could be that you have like a worksheet and maybe you have small circle, big circle, small circle, and you put all the words where the second syllable is stressed under that heading. Or maybe it's the first syllable stressed and the second 2, it's a 3-syllable word. The second 2 ones are small circles. And so they have to identify and write under big circle, small circle words where the stress is on the first syllable, and so on and so forth. So you could do it that way where you're doing it visually. If you're online, you could do an activity in like a Jamboard or in a slide where you show the learners a word and they have to either they put it or they tell you where to put the word, sorting it under the stress patterns that are showed through the big and small circles. Or you could just do it orally and you could have strips of paper if you're working in person with the learner. And so you could say, okay, banana, is it first syllable stress, second syllable stress, or third syllable stress? Tell me, where do I put this word? Okay. So it could be like you could write on the board and then you could copy it based on what the learner say. You could have the learner go up to the board, copy it based on what the word is, or you could have strips of paper with like big circle, small circle, small circle, small, big circle, small circle, small circle, big circle. Again, if you have fewer syllables, so it could just be like small circle, big circle, you could start with words. That actually might be a good strategy to just start with just 2 or 3 syllable words to begin with to kind of practice those stress patterns, but have the learners group them in that way. So any questions about grouping words into stress patterns? Any other ideas about how you could do it? I'm sure I'm not covering every single possible way, but those are some ways that I've done it in the past. Does anyone do that and do it in a different way? Okay. I'll take a minute to, yeah, I think we will probably have enough time. I can come back to this. I can show you a little clip of one of the videos I'm going to give you links to where it shows them doing this. If you like, we can come back to that. And then the final example here is putting words back into context. So after drawing some syllable awareness, then drawing learners' attention to the idea of that certain syllables are stressed and identifying where that is in the word, producing the stress, and then being able to differentiate between different stress patterns and words. Excuse me. Then, like we talked about before, it's really important to like not just have it be abstract talking about this pronunciation, but putting the words back into a context. So if you've been practicing a list of words, then taking those words and looking at a text, for example, so doing some kind of reading where then they're looking at the same words that they were practicing those different stress patterns in. And then you have something to point back to if they make a pronunciation mistake in the reading, for example, to say like, okay, well, you have this little diagram. You already grouped these words based on stress patterns. I heard you say this. What stress pattern do you notice that banana has, for example? Or a dialogue. So they also could be practicing a dialogue if you're hearing a mispronunciation. Again, being able to refer back to the work you did before and saying, okay, like we talked before that this word has a middle stress. Can you make that middle stress sound? Can you say that? And I see something in the chat. Okay. So Stacy said, I thought you might have a list of stress words typical for different first languages. That's what I initially thought stress meant when you were introduced in the beginning. Stacy, did I make it a little bit clear now? Like the difference? Because every language has like all sorts of different stress patterns. It's just a matter of looking or listening for them. You still want a list. I don't think that that exists, unfortunately, but it is something that you can look through, and some of the resources I'm going to share. Yeah, that sounds good to me, being smart and creating it. I do think that some of the resources that I'll share with you, they have some lists that are in there. They have some examples of different stress patterns and words. So they'll have that. Great. Thanks, Kate. Any other questions about word stress before we start to talk a little bit about voice quality setting? I actually kind of want, yeah, I want to show you. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment and I'm going to share. I think it's always good to see like, okay, great. Thanks for explaining that. What does it look like? I'm going to show you just a little clip from one of the different YouTube videos I'm going to share with you from Literacy Minnesota that shows them doing some of this. So bear with me for just a moment as I pull that up and make sure I have everything ready to go. Okay. So I'm actually going to hold off. I'm going to jump back. And I'm going to show it to you after this because there's an activity that actually kind of combines both the voice quality settings as well as the idea of syllables on there that I think I want to show you. So thanks for bearing with me. So the next thing that we'll talk about.
Sarah, can you
Yep.
adjust your display settings? We're
Yep,
seeing.
I sure can. Thank you.
Mhm.
How about now?
No, I think you just need to swap your screens.
Okay. How about now?
That's good.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me know. So we talked a little bit about stress and word stress. Another thing that's going to give you a lot of bang for your buck around pronunciation is voice quality settings. And voice quality settings is really just a fancy word for saying how you move and hold your mouth, but not just your mouth, it's also your teeth and your tongue and your throat. And one of the things that I really like, and this is in one of the videos that I'm going to share with you in the resource guide, is they show an example video between two different people speaking English, and they draw out your attention around what some of the differences are. So actually, I feel like this might be a good place to show. So I'm going to now try to share my video. And as you'll notice, voice quality settings differ pretty markedly between different languages. So this is in one of the videos that I'm about to show you. I'm skipping the ad before I start sharing with you because I feel like you might appreciate that. Okay. So let me make sure my sound is on. Are you seeing my screen okay?
If yeah, I'm seeing
I'm
your
going to make
screen.
it large. Hold on
Mhm.
just a moment.
We're seeing the resource page now.
Okay.
We just saw the videos a second ago.
I think it's because I moved them from screen to screen. How about now?
Now it is a gray box.
Okay. This is what happens when you have more than one screen on your computer. So let's try it again. How about now?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to make it large. Is it large?
Yes.
Okay. And I am going to hit play. So you'll hear a little explanation about these two videos, but this is going to highlight the idea of voice quality setting for you.
Which means that you will not.
Can you hear it okay?
Yeah.
Okay. It's really quiet on my end. That's why I was asking, should I turn it up at all?
Can you hit play again?
Yes.
Hear what they are saying. That is on purpose. You're not going to hear
I
what
think
they're
it's
saying.
fine.
Okay.
But what I would like you to do is instead of listening, I would like you to watch. So I'll play each speaker twice. And as you watch, please type in the chat box, what do you see? What do you see as the person is speaking? So particularly looking at their mouth. What is happening as they speak? All right, I'm going to go ahead and play this first speaker, and then just please type in the chat box as you watch. What is she doing with her mouth?
Open.
So you're not hearing anything. You're not supposed to hear anything. We're just noticing what is she doing with her mouth.
All right.
So I'll ask you the same question she's asking in the video. What do you notice? What is the first person in the first video doing with their mouth? Speaker one's mouth is moving and you could see her teeth. Yes. Anything else anyone notices?
You could see the tongue kind of moving around the middle of her mouth.
Yep, you could see the tongue moving around. I agree with Rayanne. It's very animated. Wide open, smiling. Yep. She's smiling a lot.
I was told by non-English speakers of all languages that Americans or English speakers, specifically in the United States, smile when they're delivering bad news. So I'm not sure what she's talking about, but she could be delivering bad news.
I think we are actually a pretty smiley people, irregardless of what we're saying compared to other languages. Yes, Roberta, a lot of movement, lips and chin are moving. Yeah, I think everybody caught a lot of the things. So the first speaker, lots of mouth movement. You see teeth, you see smiling. The mouth is wide open. It's big. It's very animated. What language background? So what voice quality settings do you think that this person is using? Any ideas? English? Any other guesses? It's just a guess. There's no right or wrong guesses. We'll talk about it in a minute, though.
So by voice quality setting, do you mean language?
No, that's a good point. So the voice quality setting is like there's certain voice quality settings that go along with specific languages.
Okay.
So yeah. Thanks for saying that. Because you could be speaking a language, but maybe not using the corresponding voice quality settings that are used for that language, if that makes sense. Okay. So Christine says English from US or England. Okay. Let's look at the next one. I think that the trainer in this video might tell you or spoil what this person's voice quality settings background are, what their first language is, and what language they're speaking, but we'll talk about it more after we look at the second person.
So I'm seeing a couple people posting. I'm going to just play it one more time.
I'm going to actually make it go forward so we can see the next
Her
video.
mouth is very open. She's really moving her lips. You know, generally when we're trying to articulate very clearly voice quality settings, the voice quality settings from the language we're speaking tend to get exaggerated. So what everybody just described is voice quality settings. So we have someone who's lived in Minnesota her whole life, grew up speaking English. She is using kind of classic American English voice quality settings, which means she has an open jaw. Her teeth aren't really touching. Teeth probably aren't touching together. There is lots of tongue movement because a lot of the sounds of English are produced at the front of the mouth and involve the tongue interacting with the teeth. Lots of lip movement. If we just go through the vowels, A, E, I, O, U, or A, E, O, U, you can really see just how much movement is in the lips to produce those different sounds. So yeah, really kind of the classic American English voice quality settings on display. All right, I'm going to do the same thing with the next speaker.
So we'll look at the next video now.
Please just watch. What do you see? Oh.
Okay. So I'm going to pause that there and I'm going to stop sharing and move back to my slides. But what do you notice with the second speaker?
I would like to meet the person who speaks that same language and can lip read. I would love to know who could lip read that man and know what that person was saying in whatever language he was speaking. I don't
Mhm.
see anything there. It's almost like he's whispering. So
Okay, so you're already doing a good job of describing. You said it's like he's whispering. What does that look like if someone's whispering?
their lips are really close to each other.
The
Very
lips are really
minimal,
close to
minimal
one.
gap between the lips.
Yep.
Minimal movement because you're whispering, right? Because you don't want anyone to see what you're actually saying. So those would be the first two I'd say.
Okay. Anybody else? Now reset my slides, but I'll get back to where we were. No expression, the jaw doesn't move or it's moving vertically. Okay. Almost no movement or facial animation. Okay. Not at all animated. So a big difference from the first one. So both of those people are actually speaking English. However, they are using different voice quality settings. So the first person is using American voice quality settings to speak English. The second person their home language is Korean. They're using Korean voice quality settings to speak English. So the difference being there is drawing the attention out to the speaker about the difference between those two things. Because if you are trying to speak English with Korean voice quality settings, it's going to be difficult to make the sounds in a way that is comprehensible for another person and drawing the person's attention. So you could even use videos like this with learners that you're working with to the idea that like, this is how different it is to move your mouth in these different languages. Really drives home the point that it's important to look and practice and think about moving your mouth. So when I've worked with a lot of different learners, we talk about American mouth. American mouth. So American mouth, people have a really open jaw. Other languages, maybe you're not moving your mouth so much, but you're really opening your jaw up and down a lot and speaking English. There's a lot of lip movement. Your lips are going a lot of different places. Your teeth don't usually touch, but you do see teeth quite a bit. And your tongue moves around a pretty large amount as well in English. But honestly, I think even a lot of different people use the word animated. I actually think that is a good way to kind of draw attention. Or you could just say Americans move their mouths a lot. Americans move their mouths a lot. Yeah, and Roberta said it's important to appreciate how uncomfortable the American mouth is for many other languages. So that might be something you highlight for your learners too, is that this might feel a little uncomfortable, this might be a little awkward, but in order to produce the sounds that you need to make in American English, don't worry, you're not being rude to anyone. This is how you're moving your mouth, but it's normal to feel strange or silly at first. I talk about that a lot with the learners that I work with. It's like, you might feel a little embarrassed at first, but it's okay. This is how we're going to practice making this sound, and you're not doing anything that's rude or would offend anyone. Christine said that she's getting a black stripe background.
Sarah, I think what's happening is for some reason, it's sharing like blacked out areas where you have your controls.
My controls. I moved my controls onto my other screen. Is it better now, Christine?
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to go a little quickly through the last couple things of the activities. And then I'm going to share with you, I'll have Rachel drop in the chat the resource page that has a link and actually has specific timing that will relate to the different activities I've been talking about here. For timing's sake, we'll talk about lip reading just here. So the first thing that you can do around voice quality settings is practicing lip reading. So after drawing learners' attention to the idea that voice quality settings are different in different languages, you can start to do some different activities where you practice saying a word and the learners have to guess what the word is. Like you could have someone, if it's just you and one other learner, you can practice just saying the word to them and they notice how you move your mouth to make that word. And then you can switch turns and have them do that. Thanks, Rachel, for putting the resource in the chat. So for lip reading, for example, so maybe you would have a list of words. So for this example, we'll use just these 3 words here. So we have teeth, throat, and tongue. I'm going to say the word. I'm not going to vocalize it. And you're going to try to guess what word I'm saying. Okay. Everybody ready? So what word do you think I'm saying? Yes. Yes. Yeah. So teeth. So paying attention to how someone's moving, and then you could switch turns with the learner. So they pick one of these words, or you have a list of vocabulary words. They say the word, they either come on camera. If you're in a remote class, ask them to get close, try not to be shy. Again, you can always flag the fact like this might be a little uncomfortable, but we're doing pronunciation work and this is going to help you with your pronunciation. So lip reading is one activity you can do to practice that. You could also have a mirror on hand, and you'll see some examples of this in the videos I'm going to share with you. Learners can practice looking themselves and then looking at the teacher modeling the word with a mirror. Final consonant work. So there is an example of this in the video as well, where you can start at the end of the word and move to the beginning of the word, thinking about the sounds and thinking about your voice quality settings. So for example, I think that one of the examples they use in the video is different words that end with the NK sound. So unk. So practicing that, but then building backwards. So putting a BA in front of the NK, unk, and then writing BA, bank. Or doing like other words like THI in front of the NK. So unk, think, practicing that. So in the video in particular, they show a lot of examples of this final consonant work. A lot of the learners I noticed in that video are coming from a Burmese language background. And in that language, there isn't a lot of pronunciation of the final consonant. So this activity in particular, if your learner's home language doesn't emphasize a final consonant, this can be a really good way of building backwards to emphasize and practicing pronouncing that final part of the word. Yes. So Rayanne, can you say more about that? So the id sound is terrible to get across. Are you talking about like EED, like the past tense? LD. Oh, LD. I see. Ld. Yes, that can be tricky. The L sound and the voice quality settings around that, and then the L plus the D is tricky for sure. And then the final activity you can do some work around is showing me the sound. So if we want to go back to banana, I don't know why I have bananas on the brain, but apparently I do. So after you have done some of the work maybe around word stress, you could talk about banana. What is the last sound you hear in that word? So the sound. Or you could ask it in a different way. Where do you hear this sound? Where do you hear the b sound? Where do you hear the b sound? Is it in the first, middle part of the word, or the last part of the word? And again, with all of these, I'm going to share more in the resource page. So I'm going to move on to that. So as Rachel put in the chat, and we're happy to email it out afterwards, I made a whole pronunciation resource kind of guide for you to work through. This is all, again, great work that is from Minnesota Literacy. I don't see any point in sort of reinventing the wheel when there's already this good stuff out there. A lot of it's videos, but there's also support kits, and it's organized into general pronunciation resources, word stress, and voice quality settings. And I see Kate has her hand raised. Yes, Kate.
Well, I didn't mean to do that. I was going to put it in the chat, but I hit the
Okay.
wrong one.
Either way.
But what I wanted to mention is, and I hate to admit this to a group of 20 some people, I don't actually know how to take a resource from a chat box. So maybe someone could help us with that at the end if I'm not the only one.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah, if you can stay on for a minute afterward, I'd be happy to help you with that.
Thank you.
And Stacy asked, will the slides be sent via email? I'm happy to send the slides if we're able to do that. We could send that and the resource guide out to the list if people would like, or put it on the PA Adult Ed resources.
If you would like to have that email, please put your email in the chat. You can send it directly to me if you want to send a private message so that you're not sharing your email with everybody. You can just send it to Rachel Barron or to Sarah Cole. And then
Okay. Yep.
we
Here.
can put that in the chat, just so that everybody is, because not everyone on my list for this webinar is actually in the
Okay.
webinar, if that makes sense.
Got
Okay,
it.
thanks. I see a bunch of them coming in.
Okay,
I'm going to
well,
make sure.
We'll
I'm gonna make
capture
sure
the
I save
chat.
the
Don't
chat.
worry. We'll send both the slides and the resource sheet again.
Mhm.
I'm gonna stop my sharing. I also want to be respectful of everyone's time. We are 1 minute over, but I will stay on for questions if anyone has any questions.
All right, so I'm going to stop the recording. Just a minute.